The security camera captured everything Karen's face twisted in rage as she climbed the fence for the third time this month. Her designer swimsuit already on, convinced she owned the neighborhood. What she didn't know was that David had spent weeks planning the perfect trap, one that would use her own arrogance against her. The water looked inviting, crystal clear and cool on this scorching July day. But looks can be deceiving, as Karen dove in with her usual entitled confidence. The scalding water hit her skin like liquid fire, and her screams shattered the summer air. The trap had worked flawlessly, but her fury would unleash consequences neither of them could have. David Martinez stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in his grip as he watched Karen Whitmore march across his backyard like she owned it again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawn he'd spent 3 hours mowing yesterday, and there she was, bold as brass in her hot pink bikini, dragging a pool float behind her like a conquering queen, claiming her territory. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, setting the mug down so hard coffee sloshed onto the granite countertop. This was the third time in 2 weeks. The third time she'd waltzed through the gap in his fence, the gap he'd been meaning to fix since the storm last month, helped herself to his pool while he was getting ready for work. The first time he'd been too shocked to react properly. The second time he'd confronted her, and she'd laughed in his face. "It's just water, David," she'd said, pronouncing his name like it tasted bad. "Don't be so uptight. We're neighbors." Neighbors, as if that gave her the right to trespass whenever she felt like it. David grabbed his phone and pulled up the security. Watching the live feed as Karen tested the water temperature with her manicured toe, she was 43 years old, divorced, and had moved into the McMansion next door 6 months ago with an attitude that suggested the entire cul-de-sac existed for her personal convenience. She'd already tried to get the HOA to ban his vegetable garden. It's unsightly. Complained about his dog barking. Rex had barked twice, and now this. His finger hovered over the call button. He could call the police again, but what would that accomplish? Last time, Officer Martinez, no relation, unfortunately had been sympathetic but clear. It was a civil matter. Karen would get a warning, maybe a citation, and she'd be back next week with a smirk and a new excuse. The system had failed him. The law had failed him. His neighbors, who'd watched this drama unfold with the detached interest of people enjoying a soap opera, had offered nothing but shrugs and good luck with that. Fine, if the system wouldn't protect his property, he'd handle it himself. David had always been methodical. It came from 15 years as a software engineer, where the problem had a solution if you just thought it through logically. Karen was a problem. She was predictably every Tuesday and Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. like clockwork. She was arrogant, which made her careless. She was about to learn that some people's patience had limits. He scrolled through his phone to the hardware store's website, pool heaters, solar covers, thermostat controllers. By the time Karen finished her unauthorized swim and sauntered back to her own property, David had a plan. The plan took 3 weeks to execute properly. First, he needed to understand Karen's patterns. The security cameras helped, but he also started working from home more often, ostensibly to oversee the pool maintenance he'd told his wife Sarah about. Karen came by every Tuesday and Friday without fail, always between 8:30 and 9 a.m. when she thought David had left for work. She'd stay for exactly 45 minutes, alternating between floating on her ridiculous pink flamingo and doing what she probably thought were seductive laps for the benefit of any male neighbors who might be watching. The woman was pathologically entitled. She'd even started leaving her pool supplies in his storage shed: expensive sunscreen, designer towels, a Bluetooth speaker that played music loud enough to wake the dead. When David had moved her things back to her own yard, she marched over and rang his doorbell. "Where are my things?" she demanded, hands on her hips. "On your property, where they belong. I was storing them in your shed for convenience." "My shed? My property? Figure it out." She'd stared at him like he'd grown a second head, then stormed off, muttering about difficult neighbors and common courtesy. The irony was lost on her completely. The second phase involved research. David spent hours learning about pool heating systems, water temperature regulation, and the precise mechanics of thermal shock. He consulted forums, watched YouTube videos, and even called a pool contractor under the pretense of upgrading his system. The magic number was 104 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to be genuinely uncomfortable, potentially dangerous if someone wasn't prepared for it, but not quite hot enough to cause permanent damage if someone got out quickly. The human body could handle it for short periods, but the shock would be intense, especially for someone expecting cool, refreshing water on a hot summer day. The third phase was implementation. David bought a high-capacity pool heater, a programmable thermostat controller, and a remote monitoring system that would let him control everything from his phone. He told Sarah it was part of his plan to extend their swimming season into the fall, which wasn't entirely a lie. She'd been wanting a warmer pool for months. The installation took 2 days. David worked methodically, running new electrical lines, installing the heater unit behind the privacy screen where it wouldn't be visible from Karen's house, and programming the system to activate remotely. The beauty was in the simplicity. He could heat the entire pool to whatever temperature he wanted with the touch of a button, and cool it back down just as quickly. He ran several tests when Karen wasn't around, bringing the water temperature up to 100, then 102, then 104 degrees. The system worked flawlessly. The pool looked exactly the same, crystal clear, inviting, perfectly normal. You couldn't tell the water was scalding until you touched it. On the final test run, David dipped his hand in and pulled it back immediately, hissing through his teeth. Perfect. Friday morning, July 15th, David sat in his home office, laptop open, pretending to work while watching the security feed. 8:28 a.m., right on schedule. Karen appeared at the fence line. She'd worn the hot pink bikini again, the one that was too small for her, and made her look like she was trying to recapture her 20s. The pool float was a new addition, a giant swan this time, white with gold accents. David's finger hovered over the heating controls. The pool was currently at a comfortable 78 degrees, perfect for swimming. With the new system, he could have it at 104 degrees in 12 minutes. Karen squeezed through the fence gap, high heels clicking on the concrete as she surveyed her stolen paradise. She'd gotten bolder over the weeks, acting like she owned the place. Today, she'd even brought a small cooler, probably filled with wine and expensive cheese, because of course she had. 8:29 a.m. Karen kicked off her heels and strutted to the pool's edge. David activated the heater. The woman had no idea what was coming. She arranged her towel on the lounge chair, set up her speaker, and began the ritual of applying sunscreen with the careful attention of someone preparing for a photo shoot. She took her time, clearly enjoying the fantasy that this was her private resort. 8:35 a.m. Pool temperature, 89 degrees and rising. Karen finished with the sunscreen and picked up her phone, snapping selfies by the pool. She posted them immediately. David could see her thumbs flying over the screen, probably Instagram, showing off her morning swim to her followers who had no idea she was trespassing. 8:38 a.m. Pool temperature, 95 degrees. Come on, David muttered, watching Karen fuss with her hair. Any time now. 8:40 a.m. Pool temperature, 101 degrees. Karen finally seemed satisfied with her preparations. She walked to the pool's edge, testing the water with her toe like she always did. But this time, something was different. David leaned forward, watching her face change as she processed what she was feeling. The water was warm, warmer than usual. She dipped her foot in further, frowning. 8:41 a.m. Pool temperature, 103 degrees. Karen pulled her foot back, confusion clear on her face. She bent down and put her hand in the water, leaving it there for several seconds before jerking it back with a small yelp. "What the hell?" she said aloud, looking around as if someone might be playing a prank on her. 8:42 a.m. Pool temperature, 104 degrees. David held his breath. This was the moment of truth. Karen could walk away, could decide the water was too hot for swimming, could finally respect his property and leave. The smart play would be to retreat, figure out what was going on, maybe even, God forbid, ask permission before using someone else's pool. But Karen wasn't smart. She was entitled, and entitled people don't back down from inconvenience. Bulldoze through it. She stood up, hands on her hips, glaring at the pool like it had personally offended her. "Probably just the shallow end," she muttered. "The deep end will be cooler." David's heart hammered as Karen walked to the far end of the pool, her usual spot for dramatic entrances. She positioned herself on the diving board, his diving board, the one he'd installed himself last summer, and struck a pose. "Here we go," David whispered. Karen dove in, The scream that erupted from the water wasn't human. It was primal, animalistic. The sound? The first sign of Karen's revenge came at 3:17 a.m. David jerked awake to the sound of his security system blaring, red lights flashing through the bedroom curtains like a crime scene. Sarah bolted upright beside him, her hair wild, eyes wide. With panic? "What's happening?" she gasped. David was already reaching for his phone, pulling up the security app with fingers that weren't quite steady. The camera showed his backyard in stark infrared, and there was Karen, dressed head to toe in black like some suburban ninja, spray painting something across his pool deck. "That crazy bitch," he muttered. "David," Sarah hissed. "Language." But David was already out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat he kept in the closet and heading for the stairs. Behind him, Sarah called out to be careful, to call the police, to not do anything stupid. He ignored her. This had gone beyond police reports and civil discourse. This was war. By the time he reached the backyard, Karen was gone. But her message remained spray-painted in bright red letters across the concrete. "Psycho lives here." David stood there in his boxers and t-shirts, staring at the vandalism, feeling something cold and hard settle in his chest. She'd crossed a line. This wasn't about the pool anymore. This was about destroying his reputation, his peace, his life. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "How do you like my artwork? This is just the beginning." Okay? He screenshotted the text and called 911. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, looking tired and annoyed at being dragged out for another neighbor dispute. He examined the graffiti, took photos, and dutifully wrote down David's statement about the escalating harassment. "You're sure it was Mrs. Whitmore?" Martinez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I have her on camera. Plus, she texted me about it." David showed him the screenshot. Martinez nodded, making notes. "We can cite her for vandalism, maybe get a restraining order started. But honestly, Mr. Martinez," he paused, realizing they shared a name. "Look, David, this whole situation is getting out of hand. Maybe it's time to consider mediation. Try to work something out before someone gets seriously hurt." "Someone already got hurt. She's been trespassing on my property for months. I protected myself, and now she's retaliating by heating your pool to dangerous temperatures." David felt his jaw tighten. "My pool, my property. She had no business being there." Martinez sighed. "I get it. I do. But between you and me, what you did could be seen as setting a trap. That's legally problematic, even on your own property." "Are you charging me with something?" "No, not today, but I'm saying, maybe dial back the home defense systems before this turns into something we can't walk back from." After Martinez left, David stood in his backyard, scrubbing red paint off concrete at 4 in the morning, his hands raw and his temper simmering. Sarah had gone back to bed, but not before making it clear she thought he was being an idiot about the whole thing. "Just fix the fence," she'd said. "Put up a security gate. Install better cameras." Why are you so determined to make this into World War III? Because Karen needed to learn. Because people like her never stopped pushing boundaries until someone pushed back. Because if he let her get away with this, she'd spend the next 10 years making his life miserable just because she could. The paint came off eventually, but the stain in David's mind remained. Karen had declared war, and he'd be damned if he was going to lose. The next escalation came 2 days later. David was in his home office, legitimately working this time. When he heard the commotion outside, voices, multiple people, the sound of official business being conducted on his property. He looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. 3 city vehicles were parked in his driveway: code enforcement, environmental services, and what looked like a health inspector. Karen stood on her front porch in a pristine white dress, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with obvious satisfaction. David grabbed his shoes and headed outside. "Excuse me," he called to the nearest official, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and the unmistakable bearing of a bureaucrat. "What's going on here, Mr. Martinez?" "I'm Linda Chen from Code Enforcement. We've received several complaints about potential violations on your property. We need to conduct an inspection." "What kind of violations?" Chen consulted her clipboard. "Unpermitted electrical work related to pool heating systems, potential environmental hazards from chemical storage, questions about whether your home, business has proper zoning permits." She looked up at him apologetically. I'm sorry, but we have to investigate every complaint we receive. David's eyes found Karen across the yard. She wasn't even trying to hide her smugness. And who filed these complaints? The complaints are anonymous, but anonymous, my ass. David pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, Jerry Kowalski, who handled real estate for his company. While the phone rang, he watched Karen wave at him from her porch, like they were old friends. Jerry answered on the third ring. David, what's wrong now? I need you at my house. Now, the city's here with some bullshit complaints, and I'm pretty sure my neighbor is trying to get me arrested. On my way, the inspection took 4 hours. For hours of strangers poking through his garage, examining his electrical work, taking photos of his pool equipment, and generally treating him like a criminal in his own home. The worst part was that Karen kept finding excuses to be in her front yard watering plants that clearly didn't need watering, checking her mailbox repeatedly, making sure she had a front row seat to his humiliation. In the end, they found nothing. David's electrical work was up to codehead, hired a licensed contractor for the installation. His pool chemicals were stored properly. His home office had all the necessary permits. The city officials apologized for the inconvenience and packed up their equipment, but the damage was done. By noon, half the neighborhood had driven by to see what the fuss was about. David's phone had 3 missed calls from concerned neighbors, 2 from his mother-in-law and 1 from his boss asking if everything was okay. Karen had weaponized the system against him, using the very bureaucracy that had failed to protect him from her trespassing to harass him in return. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic way. Jerry arrived just as the last city vehicle was pulling away. He was a thin, intense man in his 50s who'd built his practice defending people from exactly this kind of harassment. So, he said, surveying the scene, your neighbor's playing hardball. She spray-painted my pool deck 2 nights ago. Now this, Jerry nodded grimly, anonymous complaints are her next escalation. She can file them all day long, and the city has to investigate each one. It's harassment by proxy. Can we stop it? We can try. I'll file for a restraining order based on the vandalism and the pattern of harassment. But David Jerry's expression grew serious. This woman isn't going to stop. She's got time, money, and a serious grudge. You need to decide how far you're willing to take this. David looked across the yard at Karen, who was now pruning roses with theatrical precision. She felt his gaze and looked up, offering him a pageant wave. As far as it takes, he said. That evening, Sarah confronted him over dinner. This has to stop, she said, setting down her fork with unusual force. I came home to find city inspectors crawling all over our house. The neighbors are talking. My mother called, asking if we're having legal troubles. It's not my fault, Cheese. It's your fault you turned a simple property dispute into whatever this is. Sarah's voice rose, something that rarely happened. She was the calm one in their relationship, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found compromise. You could have just fixed the fence, David. You could have talked to her like a normal person. Instead, you set a trap that could have seriously injured someone. She was trespassing. I don't care. Sarah slammed her hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. I don't care about property rights or who started what. I care about my husband turning into someone I don't recognize. David stared at her, seeing something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Fear, not of Karen, but of him, of what he was becoming. She vandalized our property, he said quietly, and you escalated it first. You planned that pool thing for weeks. David, you researched it. You bought equipment. You set up a system designed to hurt her. That's not self-defense. That's premeditation. The words hit harder than David expected. He'd told himself he was protecting his property, defending his rights, teaching Karen a lesson she needed to learn. But when Sarah said it like that, I never meant for anyone to get seriously hurt. But you meant for her to get hurt. A little. Just enough to teach her a lesson. Sarah's voice was sad now, disappointed. That's not who you used to be. David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it because she was right. The man he'd been 6 months ago would have fixed the fence, maybe installed a security gate, found a solution that didn't involve causing pain to another human being. But Karen had pushed and pushed until she'd awakened something darker in him, something that wanted to push back twice as hard. So what do you want me to do? he asked. Let her win. Let her destroy our lives piece by piece until we have to move. I want you to be the bigger person. I want you to find a way to end this before it gets worse. But even as Sarah spoke, David's phone was buzzing with notifications. New posts on the neighborhood Facebook grow. David's counterattack began at 6 a.m. the next morning with a phone call to his old college roommate, Marcus Chen, who now ran a private investigation firm in downtown Phoenix. I need everything you can find on Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, David said, pacing his home office while Sarah slept upstairs. Financial records, employment history, criminal background, civil suits, social media, everything. Jesus, David, what's this about? She's trying to destroy my life. I need ammunition. To stop her, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Once you start digging into someone's private life, there's no going back. She went down this road when she spray-painted my property and sixed the city on me. I'm just following her lead. Okay, give me 48 hours. The next call? If Karen wanted to play games with anonymous complaints and bureaucratic harassment, David would make sure he had documentation of every single thing she did. I want cameras covering every angle of my property, David told him. Motion sensors, audio recording, night vision, the works. And I want it all admissible in court. That's going to run you about 15 grand for a system that comprehensive. Do it. The third call was to Jerry Kowalski. I want to file a harassment complaint, and I want to explore a lawsuit for defamation. We don't have enough yet for a civil suit that would then we get enough. I'm not letting her destroy my reputation and my marriage because she's bored and entitled. Jerry sighed. I'll draft the restraining order petition. But I'm telling you, again, this is going to get expensive and ugly. Are you sure you want to escalate to this level? David looked out his window at Karen's house, where she was already outside in her workout clothes, stretching on her front lawn like she owned the world. She saw him watching and blew him a kiss. I'm sure, Marcus called back 36 hours later with a voice full of suppressed excitement. Your neighbor's got problems, buddy. Big ones. David grabbed a notepad. Tell me, Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, nee Stevens. Divorced 18 months ago from Richard Whitmore, a plastic surgeon in Scottsdale. The divorce was messy allegations of infidelity on both sides. Fights over custody of their daughter, and get this, a restraining order filed against Karen by her ex-husband for what? Harassment, stalking, destruction of property. Sound familiar? She keyed his car, broke into his new girlfriend's apartment, and sent threatening messages to his patients. The restraining orders still active, David felt a cold smile spread across his face. What else? She's got money problems. Behind on her mortgage, credit cards maxed out, and she's been bouncing between jobs, currently unemployed, claiming disability for some kind of anxiety disorder. Hard to prove, but she's been posting plenty of photos of herself hiking, swimming, and doing yoga. The picture was becoming clearer. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was desperate. The big house, the designer clothes, the attitude, it was all a facade covering up a woman whose life was falling apart. There's more, Marcus continued. She's got a history of neighbor disputes. She's what we call a problem neighbor, someone who can't live next to other people without creating drama. Send me everything. Already in your email. David, be careful with this information. Some of it's public record, but some of it came from sources that wouldn't appreciate being named. Use it wisely. David spent the next 2 hours reviewing Marcus's report, and with each page, his strategy crystallized. Karen thought she was fighting a suburban dad who could be bullied into submission. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd built his career on systematic problem-solving and had the resources to fight back. Screenshots of the threatening text and documentation of the pattern of harassment. Jerry also included a cease and desist letter that laid out Karen's history of similar behavior and warned of further legal action if the harassment continued. But David's real masterstroke came that evening. He created a neighborhood email list and sent a carefully worded message to every address in the subdivision. Dear neighbors, due to ongoing security concerns, I've installed a comprehensive surveillance system on my property. The cameras have audio recording capability and 24/7 monitoring. Any suspicious activity will be immediately reported to police, and all footage will be preserved for legal proceedings. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, but recent events have made enhanced security necessary. Please feel free to contact me with any questions. Best regards, David Martinez. The message was polite, reasonable, and completely legal. It was also a declaration of war that every neighbor would understand. David wasn't just protecting his property anymore. He was documenting everything. Within an hour, his phone was ringing. "David, it's Patricia from across the street. I just wanted you to know that woman's been asking questions about you and Sarah, personal questions about your work, your finances, your marriage." It made me uncomfortable. The next call was from Tom Rodriguez, 2 houses down. "She tried to get me to sign some petition about your pool being a public safety hazard. I told her to take a hike, but she's definitely working the neighborhood." By 9 p.m., David had received 6 similar calls. Karen hadn't just been harassing him, she'd been conducting a whisper campaign, trying to turn the entire neighborhood against him. The revelation filled him with cold fury and vindication. Up like a Christmas tree, as motion sensors detected someone approaching his property, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a large bag and what looked like a crowbar. This time, David didn't confront her. She ripped up his tomato plants, smashed his wife's flower pots, and used the crowbar to damage his irrigation system. The whole destructive spree lasted 12 minutes and was captured from 4 different angles with perfect audio. When she was finished, Karen stood in the middle of the devastation and looked directly at one of the cameras. She smiled, raised her middle finger, and mouthed the words, "Fuck you." David saved the footage to 3 different cloud storage accounts and sent copies to Jerry's office. Then he called 911. Officer Martinez looked at the garden destruction, reviewed the security footage on David's phone, and shook his head. "This is felony vandalism, destruction of property over $1,000, criminal trespass, and given the restraining order. Petition that's already been filed, this could be considered stalking. Are you arresting her?" "I'm going to knock on her door first, see if she wants to explain herself." David watched from his front window as Martinez approached Karen's house, the porch. Light came on, and after a few minutes of conversation, Karen emerged in handcuffs. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers, her hair disheveled, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. As the patrol car pulled away, Karen locked eyes with David through his window. Even from that distance, even in handcuffs, her expression was pure hatred. This wasn't over. This was just another escalation in a war that was spiraling completely. Out of control, Sarah appeared beside him, also watching the arrest. "Are you happy now?" David looked at his destroyed garden, at the police car disappearing down the street, at his wife's disappointed face. "I'm satisfied that justice was served." "This isn't justice, David. This is 2 people destroying each other," she started. And you're determined to finish it, no matter what it costs." Sarah turned away from the window. "I need to think about whether I want to be married to someone who's turned into this." David wanted to argue, to explain that he was protecting them, that Karen was the real problem. But as Sarah walked upstairs to pack a bag, he realized that his victory felt hollow. He'd won this battle, but he was losing everything else that mattered. The war was escalating beyond his control, and there was no way to stop it now. Karen made bail at 6:30 a.m. David knew because his phone buzzed with an alert from the victim. Notification system Jerry had enrolled him in. He sat in his empty kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the message while his coffee grew cold. Sarah's absence felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest, but he pushed the feeling aside. He had bigger problems now. Karen would be furious, humiliated, and desperate people with nothing left to lose were the most dangerous. Kind? He was right. The first sign came at 8:15 a.m. when David's boss, Linda Chen, called, "David, I need you to come in immediately. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves HR, legal, and a very serious conversation." "About your employment status." David's blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "Someone called the company claiming you've been using our equipment for illegal surveillance activities. They said you're stalking and harassing a female neighbor and that you've been working from home to avoid criminal charges." "That's complete bullshit, Linda. I can explain in person now." David threw on clean clothes and drove to his office in a haze of disbelief and rage. Karen had gone nuclear. She wasn't just attacking his property or his reputation in the neighborhood anymore. She was going after his livelihood. The meeting was a nightmare. Linda, the HR director, and the company's legal counsel sat across from him like a tribunal, their faces grave and professional. Someone had sent the company detailed allegations about David's pattern of harassment and criminal behavior, complete with photos of his security system and claims that he was using company resources for personal vendettas. "David," Linda said carefully, "these are serious allegations. We need to understand what's been happening and how it might affect your position here." David explained everything. The trespassing, the pool incident, Karen's retaliation, the arrest. He showed them the security footage, the police reports, the restraining order petition. He laid out the timeline of events with a methodical precision that had made him valuable to the company for 15 years, but he could see in their faces that it didn't matter. The damage was done. Even if every word he said was true, even if he was completely justified, the company couldn't afford to be associated with an employee involved in escalating criminal disputes. "We're placing you on administrative leave pending the resolution of the legal issues," the HR director said. "Full pay, full benefits, but you can't work on any company projects or access company systems until this is resolved." "How long?" "That depends on how quickly you can resolve your legal situation." David drove home in a fog of rage and disbelief. Administrative leave was corporate speak, for "we're getting ready to fire you, but we need to cover our legal bases first." 15 years of loyal service, of 60-hour weeks and successful projects. Wiped out by one phone call from a psychotic neighbor, his phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. "Jerry, we have a problem," the lawyer said without preamble. "Attorney just filed a counter-restraining order against you. They're claiming you've been stalking her, that the pool incident was attempted assault, and that your surveillance system is being used to harass and intimidate her." "That's insane. I have proof. They have proof too. Photos of your cameras pointed at her property, testimony from neighbors about your threatening behavior, and they're claiming the pool heating was premeditated assault with a dangerous weapon." David felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. A dangerous weapon. Hot water can cause serious injury or death. If they can prove you intentionally set a trap to harm her, you could be looking at criminal charges. She was trespassing, which is a misdemeanor. Assault with a dangerous weapon is a felony. David sat in his car staring at his house, his fortress of cameras and sensors, and documented evidence, and realized that Karen had played him perfectly. Every move he'd made to protect himself had been turned into evidence of his guilt. The security system made him look paranoid and threatening. The pool trap made him look calculating and dangerous. His methodical documentation of her behavior made him look obsessed. "There's more," Jerry continued. "She's filed a civil suit. Assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and harassment. She's asking for damages, medical expenses, and punitive awards that could total 7 figures. 7 figures. For jumping in a hot pool, she's claiming ongoing psychological trauma, PTSD, inability to work, loss of enjoyment of life. It's standard lawsuit inflation. But with the right jury, ... double quotes, David closed his eyes. Karen had weaponized the legal system against him with surgical precision. She understood something he'd missed in his quest for justice. The system didn't care who was right. It only cared who looked more sympathetic. And a middle-aged woman claiming to be terrorized by her aggressive male neighbor would always win. That contest. What do? We fight. But David, you need to understand what you're facing. Legal fees alone could run 6 figures. If she wins the civil suit, it could bankrupt you. And if the DA decides to pursue criminal charges, I could go to prison. It's possible." David ended the call and sat in his driveway, watching Karen's house through his windshield. She was home, her car was in the driveway, and he could see movement behind the curtains, probably talking to her lawyer, planning her next move, savoring her victory. She'd played the game better than he had. While he'd been focused on protecting his property and proving his point, she'd been systematically destroying his life, his job, his marriage, his legal standing. His financial security, all of it was crumbling because he'd underestimated a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. That evening, David sat alone in his house, surrounded by the evidence of his war with Karen. Security monitors showed empty yards. Legal documents covered his dining room table. His phone had 17 missed calls from Sarah, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What would he tell her that he'd been right about? Karen being dangerous, but wrong about everything else. that his quest for justice had destroyed their life together. At 9:30 p.m., his doorbell rang. David checked the security monitor and felt his heart stop. Karen stood on his front porch, looking composed and professional in a Navy business suit. No lawyer, no police backup, no witnesses, just her, alone, with a manila folder in her hand. He almost didn't answer. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that opening the door would give her ammunition for her next attack. But curiosity won. He needed to understand what she was thinking, what her endgame was. He opened the door, but kept the chain engaged. "Hello, David," Karen said pleasantly. "May I come in? I think we should talk. We have nothing to discuss. Anything you want to say can go through our lawyers. I think you'll want to hear what I have to offer." She held up the folder. "It could save you a lot of trouble." Against his better judgment, David unchained the door. Karen stepped into his foyer like she owned the place, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She looked around approvingly, at his security monitors, his legal documents, the fortress he'd built to defend himself. "Impressive," she said. "Very thorough, but ultimately pointless." "What do you want, Karen?" She opened the folder and handed him a single sheet of paper. "A settlement offer." David scanned the document. Karen was offering to drop all legal actions, criminal complaints, and civil suits in exchange for $250,000, and a signed agreement that he would never discuss their dispute with anyone. $250,000. David laughed bitterly. "You're insane, am I? Let's see. Your legal fees will run at least $100,000, probably more. If I win the civil suit, you'll owe me 7 figures plus my legal costs. Your job is already gone. Administrative leave is just corporate politeness before they fire you. Your wife left you. Your reputation in the neighborhood is destroyed." Karen smiled. $250,000 is a bargain compared to what this will cost you if we keep fighting." David stared at the paper, hating that her math made sense. "Why would you settle? You're winning." "Because I don't want to win, David. I want to survive." Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You think this is fun for me? You think I enjoy spending every waking moment planning how to destroy my neighbor? I'm broke, David. The legal fees are eating me alive, too. The stress is killing me. I just want this to end." "Then why didn't you just stop trespassing?" "Because you humiliated me." The words exploded out of her with shocking intensity. "Made me look like a fool in front of the entire neighborhood. You treated me like I was nothing, like my feelings didn't matter, like I deserved to be punished for wanting to use a stupid pool." David saw it, then the core of Karen's rage. It wasn't about the pool or property rights or legal victories. It was about respect, about being seen as important, about not being dismissed or ignored. Her whole life was falling apart, and the pool had been her one small pleasure, her one escape from the reality of her failed marriage and financial problems. When David had taken that away, he'd taken away her dignity. "Karen," he said quietly, "I never meant to humiliate you. I just wanted you to respect my property." "Well, congratulations. You got your respect." Her voice was bitter now, tired, and it cost both of us everything. David looked at the settlement offer again.